August 3rd, 1944. 6:10 a.m. Mist lay low over the English countryside, clinging to hedgerows and damp fields that had not heard gunfire, but had felt its consequences. A line of wooden barracks stood quiet at the edge of a farm, their doors closed, their windows fogged from breath inside. Beyond them, cows shifted in the grass, unaware of borders, uniforms, or wars. Inside one of the huts, a man sat awake on his bunk, boots already on. He had learned to wake before the guards, before the whistle, before routine claimed the day. His name no longer mattered here. He was a prisoner, a number, a former enemy, living on borrowed time. He listened to the farm wake. A gate creaked, a bucket struck metal, footsteps crossed gravel, light and familiar. He knew that sound. He had learned it the way men learned shelling patterns at the front, not by choice, but by repetition. The wire fence surrounding the camp was visible from the field. It was not tall. It was not electrified. It was a nog enough to remind him that even safety could be a cage. He stood, heart steady, hands calm. Escape did not feel dramatic. It felt quiet, deliberate, like deciding to breathe differently. He slipped outside with the work detail, moving among men who no longer spoke of leaving. Routine had worn hope thin. At the edge of the field, he paused. The farm stretched open, green and ordinary. Beyond it stood a farmhouse with whitewashed walls and windows that caught the morning light. Someone lived there who was not afraid of him. He stepped away from the line. No alarm sounded. No shout followed. The guards did not turn. The war did not pause to notice. He crossed the field, not as a soldier, not as a fugitive, but as a man choosing a future that had no right to exist. That decision, made in silence, would carry consequences no one could predict, leading not toward freedom alone, but toward connection, risk, and a life that would force history to bend around something it never planned for. By 1944, thousands of German prisoners of war were held across Britain. Many had been captured in North Africa or Italy and transported far from the front lines. They were housed in camps attached to farms, quarries, and construction projects, used as labor under the rules of the Geneva Convention. The man was one of them. He had been a soldier, conscripted young, trained quickly, sent to fight without understanding the machinery that had claimed him. He had survived combat, surrender, transport across the sea, and the strange shock of captivity that was safer than freedom had ever been. British farms faced labor shortages. Men were at the front. Crops still needed tending. POW labor filled the gap. Prisoners worked fields, repaired fences, milked cows. They were guarded, but not constantly watched. Over time, familiarity replaced fear. The farmer was cautious, but practical. The prisoner worked hard, followed rules, spoke little. Trust grew, not through words, but consistency. And then there was the daughter. She was not part of the arrangement. She was simply there, living her life at the edge of war. She brought food, carried water, asked questions without hostility. She did not see a uniform first. She saw a person. Their interactions were limited, measured. A nod, a sentence exchanged. Shared tasks, done quietly. The war hovered between them, unspoken but understood. For the prisoner, this was dangerous territory. Attachment threatened survival, but isolation had already stripped him of identity. The farm offered something captivity did not. Recognition. He learned English slowly. Words came with gestures. Meaning filled the gaps. He learned the rhythms of civilian life, the way time moved differently without gunfire. The farm became a place where the future felt imaginable. But the camp remained. The wire remained. The knowledge that the war would end. And with it, his temporary permission to exist here. Rumors spread among prisoners. Repatriation. trials, uncertainty. Some planned escape. Most did not. Britain was an island. Escape felt pointless. For him, it did not feel pointless anymore. It felt necessary. The idea of leaving was not driven by hatred or ideology. It was driven by belonging, by the fear that when the war ended, he would be sent back to ruins, to judgment, to a life defined by choices he had not made. He began to imagine a different ending. Not heroic, not clean, complicated, fragile, human. That imagination became pressure, and pressure became momentum, carrying him forward into transformation. The change was gradual, unfolding through ordinary days. He woke, worked, ate, slept. But something beneath routine shifted. He stopped counting the days until the war's end. He began counting moments instead. The farmer's daughter spoke to him more freely now, not out of defiance, but habit. They discussed weather, animals, small problems that existed independently of global collapse. These conversations built something dangerous. Normalcy. He understood the risk she took. Association alone could bring suspicion. Yet she treated him without calculation. That honesty reshaped him more than freedom ever could. He began helping beyond assigned tasks. Fixing tools, repairing a gate at night. Small acts that blurred lines between prisoner and worker. The farmer noticed. He did not ask questions. He simply allowed the help. Within the camp, the man became quieter. Others spoke of home, of revenge, of what they would do after release. He listened, said little. His future no longer fit their conversations. Escape became less about running, more about staying. He did not want to vanish into the countryside. He wanted to remain exactly where he was, without wire, without permission. The opportunity emerged slowly. Guards relaxed further. Harvest season demanded flexibility. Movement increased. Oversight decreased. The farm became both cover and destination. The man planned carefully, not as a soldier, but as someone who understood the cost of mistakes. He knew escape would brand him forever. He knew discovery would end everything. He did not tell the daughter his intentions. Protection required silence. He did not want her forced into choice. When he stepped away from the work line that morning, it was not toward anonymity, but toward responsibility. He crossed into the farmyard openly. The farmer saw him. He did not shout. The conversation that followed was brief, honest, dangerous. The farmer understood the law. He also understood what standing before him was asking. He said nothing for a long time. Then, I nodded. The man was hidden, not in fear, but in plain sight. He worked harder than before. He lived within walls not meant for him. The daughter learned the truth later. She did not The war continued elsewhere. Here, it narrowed to a house, a field, a secret. The transformation was complete. He was no longer defined by uniform or captivity. He was defined by commitment, by the acceptance of consequences. This choice did not erase the war. It carried it forward into a life that would be questioned, challenged, and tested long after the guns fell silent. That tension moves directly into the impossible idea that follows. By late autumn 1944, the war had shifted again. News traveled slowly to the farm, carried by radios turned low and newspapers folded carefully after reading. Allied forces were pushing across Europe. Germany was retreating. The end felt closer, but clarity did not come with it. For the man in hiding, the approaching conclusion brought danger, not relief. If the war ended, records would be reviewed, camps inspected, prisoners accounted for. An escaped POW could not remain invisible forever. Hiding was no longer a temporary solution. It was a ticking clock. The impossible idea formed quietly, not in a moment of inspiration, but through necessity. Staying hidden meant constant risk for everyone involved. Leaving Britain meant capture. Returning to Germany meant facing a country shattered, and possibly punishment tied to a uniform he'd no longer wore in spirit, but could never fully remove. There was only one path that offered permanence. Legitimacy. A life that could not be erased by paperwork. Marriage. It was unthinkable on every level. A German prisoner of war marrying a British civilian during an active conflict defied law, custom, and public sentiment. Such unions were rare, scrutinized, and often blocked outright. Approval required investigations, permissions, and time, none of which favored an escaped prisoner. Yet the idea persisted because it was rooted in reality, not fantasy. The connection already existed. The commitment was already there. What remained was the courage to confront systems built to prevent exactly this outcome. The farmer understood immediately what was being asked of him. His family's reputation, his livelihood, his daughter's future, all placed at risk by association. Harboring an escaped POW was a serious offense. Supporting a marriage would draw attention that hiding never had. The daughter listened without interruption. There was no dramatic declaration, no illusion of romance overpowering reason. She asked practical questions. What would happen if authorities refused? What consequences she might face? What life would look like afterward? The answers were uncertain. Some outcomes were bleak. Still, she did not withdraw. The war had already demanded sacrifices from her generation. This was simply another Schuss-in. Freely, without flags or slogans, they began the process, quietly. The man turned himself in, not as an act of surrender, but strategy. Voluntarily return carried different implications than recapture. He explained his absence as confusion, fear, poor judgment. He did not accuse, did not resist, did not justify. Authorities were skeptical. Files were reviewed. Interviews conducted. The relationship raised alarms. Questions of loyalty, influence, and morality surfaced quickly. The burden of proof fell entirely on the civilian family. The impossible idea moved forward anyway, slowed by bureaucracy, tension, and doubt. Each step required restraint. Any display of defiance would end everything. Time stretched. The war pressed on. Every delay increased the risk that policy would harden as victory neared. Yet within that pressure, something shifted. Officials encountered consistency instead of ideology. A man who worked, complied, and accepted responsibility. A family that did not excuse, but accepted reality. The idea remained impossible on paper, but history is shaped as much by exceptions as by rules. That fragile opening led directly into execution, where personal conviction met public authority, and every decision carried irreversible weight. The final stages unfolded without spectacle, but with intensity that rivaled any battlefield decision. Meetings were scheduled, canceled, rescheduled. Documents moved between offices. Each signature represented not approval, but willingness to assume responsibility. The man was returned to official custody, yet treated differently now. He was no longer simply a prisoner, it was a case. His behavior was monitored closely. Any infraction would confirm doubts already waiting. The daughter faced scrutiny from a community. Questions were indirect, but pointed. Some neighbors avoided her. Others watched with curiosity. The war had trained people to simplify morality. Her choice resisted simplification. A chaplain became involved. So did legal officers. The relationship was examined for coercion, manipulation, or propaganda value. None was found. What remained unsettled officials most was its ordinariness. The ceremony, when finally approved, was small, controlled, observed. There were no celebrations beyond necessity. No speeches about reconciliation. Only formal words spoken carefully, recorded precisely. The man stood without uniform. The woman stood without ceremony. They did not smile for history. They focused on each other. Outside, the war continued to claim lives by the hour. Inside that room, it lost its authority over the people determined to define themselves beyond it. The marriage did not erase suspicion. It transformed it. The man's status changed from escaped prisoner to protected spouse under conditional oversight. His movements remained restricted. His future remained uncertain, but uncertainty now belonged to both of them, shared equally. When the war ended months later, the transition was not instant. Policies lagged behind peace. Former enemies were still sorted, processed, judged. The man was not sent away. He stayed, worked, applied for residency, faced reviews that revisited every detail of his past. Nothing was hidden. Nothing exaggerated. The process took years. It demanded patience greater than escape ever had. Freedom arrived not through speed, but endurance. This execution, quiet and procedural, proved more dangerous than any flight from a camp. It required trust in systems designed during fear, and belief that humanity could still be recognized within them. What followed would determine how this story would be remembered, not as a wartime anomaly, but as a lasting human consequence. When the guns finally fell silent in Europe, the war did not end cleanly for those whose lives had crossed enemy lines. Paperwork replaced barbed wire. Questions replaced commands. The former prisoner remained under review, his past examined again in a world struggling to redefine justice without revenge. The marriage forced authorities to confront an uncomfortable truth. War categorized people efficiently, but peace required nuance. This case offered no propaganda value, no heroic framing, and no clear villain. It presented only two civilians bound together by circumstance, choice, and consequence. Historically, such unions were rare, not because they never happened, but because they were discouraged, delayed, or erased from record. This one survived because it passed every test placed before it. Investigations found no coercion, no ideological motivation, no violation beyond the original escape, already acknowledged and resolved through process. The man was eventually granted permission to remain, not as a symbol of forgiveness, but as a resident accountable to law. He worked ordinary jobs, paid taxes, spoke little about the war. His past did not disappear, but it no longer defined his future. For the woman, life returned to routine slowly. The farm endured. Social suspicion faded as years passed without incident. What once seemed scandalous became simply familiar. Time accomplished what arguments never could. In historical context, the story matters not because it was unique, but because it was possible. It demonstrates that even during total war, systems contained narrow spaces where humanity could still operate. Those spaces were fragile, inconsistent, and often dependent on individual judgment rather than policy. The significance lies in restraint. No one involved attempted to rewrite the war through this marriage. No side claimed moral victory. The story did not absolve nations or condemn them wholesale. It recorded a small deviation from expected outcomes, preserved because it harmed no one and healed at least two. This aftermath did not reshape borders or treaties. It reshaped understanding. It reminds historians that beneath uniforms and classifications existed lives capable of change without spectacle. That understanding carries forward into the epilogue, where legacy is measured not by headlines, but by the quiet continuity of a shared life. They lived without ceremony. No anniversary is marked in public record. No interviews given. Their story survived through documents, local memory, and fragments preserved unintentionally. The man never denied who he had been. He simply refused to remain frozen there. The woman never framed her choice as bravery. She described it as responsibility, taken with open eyes. Their children grew up without inheriting the war as identity. History entered their lives through textbooks, not whispers. The past existed, but it did not dominate the present. In later years, when asked privately about the escape, the answer was always brief. Fear, followed by help, followed by consequences. No heroism claimed. No bitterness expressed. The war was described as something that compressed time, forcing decisions faster than wisdom could form. Legacy here is not reconciliation a spectacle. It is coexistence without denial. The story does not argue that love conquers war. It shows that war fails to erase love entirely. For audiences today, the value lies in restraint. This is not a tale of redemption through romance. It is evidence that even inside rigid systems, individual accountability can produce outcomes. Neither side predicted. History often demands sides. This story resists that demand. It exists between categories, where most civilian lives actually unfold. The final human note is simple. Two people refused to let a conflict define the totality of who they could become. They accepted judgment, complied with law, and built a life measured not by origin, but by conduct. That quiet persistence is what endured long after the uniforms disappeared. This is the history of World War II. Whoever oppresses the innocent is an oppressor. Neither the earth belongs to this oppressor, nor does the sky belong to him. We stand, now and forever, with the oppressed. This is WWII Files. See you in the next one.